Welcome to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, the channel dedicated to lost stories of the biblical past. Discover stories of pre-Christian historical roots, biblical legends, lost church history and forgotten historical characters of faith. It is very helpful if you hit the like, subscribe and share. Help build my channel and let's take a look together into these uncovered forgotten tales. Imagine this, it's 1823, and flames are consuming one of Rome's most sacred churches. As St. Paul's Basilica burns to the ground, something extraordinary is about to be revealed, or rather, hidden forever. Because what the Vatican doesn't want you to know is that the body they claim lies beneath that altar isn't actually there. It never was. Today we're diving into one of Christianity's most explosive secrets, the story of how Christ's original apostles didn't just spread the gospel around the Mediterranean. They traveled much further north than anyone wants to admit, to a mystical island called Avalon, in ancient Britain, where they established what may have been Christianity's true first church. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is documented history, buried in Vatican archives, carved in ancient stones, and recorded by some of the most respected church historians who ever lived. So buckle up, because everything you thought you knew about early Christianity is about to change. Let's start with a scene that would make Game of Thrones look tame. It's 1st century Britain, and Roman legions are carving a bloody path across the island. Celtic warriors are fighting desperately to protect their homeland. But in the middle of all this chaos, there's one place that remains untouchable, a sacred island called Avalon. Now, you might know Avalon from Arthurian legend, but its real history is far more extraordinary than any myth. While Roman swords were claiming British lives across the countryside, Avalon had become something unprecedented, a Christian sanctuary where Jesus' own disciples had found refuge. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about the men who actually walked with Christ, who witnessed the crucifixion, who saw the resurrection with their own eyes. And they weren't just hiding out in Jerusalem or traveling around the familiar territories of the Middle East. They were in Britain. The historical records are crystal clear about who made this incredible journey. Lazarus, yes, the man Jesus raised from the dead, was there. So was Barnabas, the cousin of Mark who wrote one of the Gospels. Zacchaeus, the little tax collector who climbed a tree to see Jesus. James, Luke, Simon, Paul, and most shocking of all, Peter himself, the rock upon which Christ said he would build his church. But here's where the story gets really interesting. These weren't just refugees hiding from Roman persecution. They were actively building something revolutionary, the world's first truly organized Christian community, right there in ancient Britain. Now, let's talk about the martyrs, because understanding how these apostles died reveals why Britain became so important to early Christianity. Take James, Jesus' own brother, not the Apostle James, but James the Just, the first bishop of Jerusalem. In 41 AD, historical records show he was traveling back from Spain when he made a crucial detour. He visited Gaul and then Britain, specifically to check on the Avalon community. 7 years later, he was present at one of the most significant events in Christian history, the death of Mary, the mother of Jesus, right there at Avalon. But James's story doesn't end peacefully. In 62 AD, 4 years before Paul's martyrdom, James was stoned to death by an angry mob in Jerusalem, in the exact same spot where Stephen, Christianity's first martyr, had met the same fate. Then there's Luke, the physician who wrote both the Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles. Professor Smith's Dictionary of Christian Biography reveals that Luke wasn't just traveling around the Mediterranean. He made frequent trips to Britain, specifically to visit what the records call the Sainted Company at Avalon. And Barnabas, Paul's traveling companion, met his end in Cyprus, stoned to death like so many others. When his young kinsman Mark buried him, he placed a copy of Matthew's Gospel on Barnabas's chest. Even in death, these men were connected by their mission to preserve and spread Christ's message. But the most incredible story of all belongs to Peter. Peter's time in Britain reads like an ancient thriller. It starts in 44 AD in Rome, where he's staying with a senator named Rufus on Viminalis Hill. But that same year, Emperor Claudius issues a devastating decree: all Jews must flee Rome immediately or face persecution. Now, here's where most history books get it wrong. They'll tell you Peter fled to some nearby province, maybe back to Jerusalem. But a 4th century scholar named Cornelius and Lapid reveals the truth in his commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans. He asks a simple question: why doesn't Paul greet Peter in his letter to the Roman Church? The answer is stunning. Peter, banished with the rest of the Jews from Rome by the edict of Claudius, was absent in Britain. Peter didn't just visit Britain once. He made it his base of operations. Using Avalon as his headquarters, he traveled throughout the island, preaching during the brutal Caradoc-Claudian War. He got to know the royal British families, the houses of Arviragus and Caractacus, and he was particularly close to the children of Caractacus, years before they were taken to Rome as prisoners. But we're not just relying on ancient texts here. In recent decades, archaeologists made a discovery that sends shivers down your spine. At Whithorn, they uncovered a rough-hewn stone monument, 4 feet high and 15 inches wide. Carved into its face, in ancient Latin, are the words, Lov Sancti Petri Apostoli, the place of Saint Peter the Apostle. Peter wasn't just visiting Britain. He was establishing churches, converting the locals, and creating a Christian foundation that would outlast the Roman Empire itself. But every great story has its dark chapter, and Peter's ends in a place that haunts the imagination, the Mamertine Prison in Rome. Picture the most horrifying dungeon you can imagine, then make it worse. The Mamertine was a double-chambered hellhole carved out of solid rock beneath Rome's capital. The only way in was through a hole in the ceiling. The lower chamber, where they kept prisoners marked for death, never saw sunlight and was never cleaned. The stench was so overwhelming that the historian Sallust, writing in 50 BC, described it as terrific from the filth, the darkness and the smell. This is where the Romans threw Peter when they finally recaptured him. For 9 months, he was chained upright to a stone pillar, unable to lie down, unable to rest, in absolute darkness. The same dungeon where Jugurtha had been starved until he went insane. The same place where Julius Caesar had ordered the murder of Vercingetorix, the brave Gallic chieftain. But here's what makes Peter's story so extraordinary. Even in that nightmare pit, surrounded by death and torture, his spirit never broke. Historical records tell us that during those 9 months of agony, he actually converted his jailers. A man named Processus, another named Martinianus, and 47 other prison guards became Christians because of Peter's unwavering faith. When the Romans finally dragged him out for execution in Nero's circus in 67 AD, Peter made one final request that epitomizes his character. He asked to be crucified upside down, declaring himself unworthy to die in the same position as his Lord. The Romans, thinking they were adding one final insult, granted his wish. But death wasn't the end of these apostles' British connection. In fact, their most remarkable journey was still to come. After the executions, the Roman Christian families, particularly the Pudens family, who had close ties to British royalty, carefully retrieved the bodies of Peter and Paul. They buried Paul on the Via Ostiensis road outside Rome. When Constantine became emperor 3 centuries later, he had Paul's body exhumed and placed in a stone sarcophagus, building the famous St. Paul's Basilica over the site. Now here's where the story takes an incredible turn. In 656 AD, Pope Vitalian wrote a letter to the British King Oswy. That letter still exists today, and what it says will shock you. The Pope gave permission for the bodies of Peter and Paul, along with other major saints, to be moved from Rome to England and reburied in the great church at Canterbury. This isn't some wild speculation. The transfer was recorded by the Venerable Bede, one of the most respected historians in church history, a man so revered that both the British Church and the Roman Catholic Church consider him a saint. Bede was meticulous about his sources, and he had no reason to fabricate such a monumental claim. So when you visit St. Paul's Basilica in Rome today, and a priest shows you the stone-marked Pauli through the floor grill, you're looking at an empty tomb. The American archaeologist Professor Kinnaman put it perfectly: the real earthly remains of the apostle to the Gentiles sleep in the soil of England, beyond the reach of the arm of the Roman law. Why does any of this matter? Why should we care where ancient apostles traveled or where their bones ended up? Because this story reveals something profound about the nature of early Christianity. It wasn't the organized, Rome-centered religion that we know today. It was a movement of extraordinary courage, spreading to the furthest corners of the known world, taking root in the most unexpected places. The British Christians who learned from these apostles didn't just receive the gospel passively. When Roman persecution intensified, they fought back with a ferocity that amazed their oppressors. Roman writers described watching British Christians in the arena, facing lions and gladiators, and being stunned by their courage. Mothers would push their children forward to die first, to spare them additional suffering. Warriors would fight multiple opponents to the death, often taking their killers with them. The story of Avalon and the British apostles challenges everything we think we know about Christian origins. It suggests that the official version of church history, the one that flows neatly from Jerusalem to Rome to the rest of Europe, is missing some crucial chapters. If you would like further context and the rest of the story, check out previous videos and future videos. If you would like more information where to research this subject, pause this image and look into these resources or find resources in description. If you have book sources or links of your own on this subject, please share in comments or email me. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this forgotten biblical story. Leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. This is very helpful. Join me next time for another lost story of our biblical history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.